I fell in the cereal aisle of a Kroger on a Wednesday morning, and my son didn't pick up the phone for 2 days. Not once. Not a single time out of the 31 calls the paramedics and the hospital made to the number I'd listed as my emergency contact for the past 9 years. 31 calls. 2 days. And when I finally came back to myself in a hospital bed in Cincinnati with tubes in my arm and a blood pressure cuff squeezing my wrist every 4 hours, the first thing I saw wasn't my son's face. It was a photo on the phone screen Anaya held up gently, the way you hold something that might shatter. My son was at a ropes course, a company retreat, smiling in a group photo with 23 colleagues, arms spread wide on a wooden platform, the forest canopy behind him, his caption reading, "Disconnecting to reconnect. Best team I've ever had the privilege of leading. No emails, no calls, just presence." No calls. He'd written that himself. No calls. Before we go any further, if stories about family loyalty and quiet courage speak to you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to know where you're watching from tonight. Your city or your state means more to me than you know, and I want to be transparent with you. Some details in this story have been changed to protect privacy, but the truth at the center of it, every painful inch of it, is real. My name is Margaret, and I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years teaching 8th grade English at Riverside Middle School in Cincinnati. I retired 4 years ago when my husband Gerald died because the hallways felt too loud without someone to come home to. Gerald was the kind of man who had dinner waiting when I got home from parent-teacher nights, who remembered the names of every student I ever complained about and asked follow-up questions months later. Who made me feel every single day for 38 years like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. When he died, I lost the compass that had oriented my whole life. So I leaned into the one thing I thought I still had, my son, Nathan. I should tell you who Nathan is, the version I believed in for too long. Nathan is 41, a regional director at a logistics company, sharp and efficient and relentlessly focused on his career. His wife Brenda is the same way, polished and corporate, with a smile that's always slightly too prepared. Their son Cooper is 8 years old and the single greatest joy in my life since Gerald passed. Cooper has Gerald's eyes, dark brown and warm, and he laughs at everything, loud and unashamed, the way children do before the world teaches them to hold back. For the first year after Gerald died, Nathan was present. Not warmly present, not the way Gerald would have been, but there. Calls on Sunday evenings. A visit at Thanksgiving. He helped me sort through Gerald's workshop, though he moved quickly, boxes labeled and taped before I'd even decided what I wanted to keep. I told myself he was grieving too. I told myself busy people show love in their own ways. By the second year, the Sunday calls became every other Sunday, then monthly, then whenever it occurred to him, which wasn't often. Cooper's birthday fell on a school day, and they celebrated over a weekend trip to a resort in Nashville. I found out from a photo online, not an invitation, just a photo. I called to say happy birthday to Cooper and got Brenda, who said, very pleasantly, that they were in the middle of dinner and she'd have him call me back. He didn't call back. Last Christmas, they spent the holiday with Brenda's parents in Scottsdale. I drove 40 minutes to drop off Cooper's gifts on December 22nd. Stood on their front porch for 15 minutes, and left the bag by the door when no one answered. I found out later they were home. Brenda's car was in the garage. I told myself she probably had Cooper down for a nap. I told myself a lot of things. The Wednesday I collapsed, I was doing my regular grocery run. Nothing dramatic about the morning. I'd had coffee, taken my medications, driven to Kroger, filled half my cart. I remember reaching for a box of oatmeal on the middle shelf, and then I remember the floor. That's the gap. Between reaching and floor, there is nothing, just absence. What I pieced together later, I had a mini-stroke. A thanks in advance. The doctors call it a transient ischemic attack. It lasted maybe 2 minutes. But I hit the floor hard when I went down, and there was blood from a cut on my forehead, and a woman named Donna from the next aisle over had called 911 before I was fully conscious again. Donna was 63 years old. a stranger, and she held my hand in the cereal aisle of a Kroger and told me her name and told me I was going to be okay until the paramedics arrived. At the hospital, they took my phone from my purse. They found Nathan's name under ice, emergency contact. They called 31 times over the next 2 days. And I want to be clear about what 2 days means. It means they called while I was being assessed in the emergency department. They called while I was having a CT scan of my brain. They called while a neurologist explained to the nurse on duty what had likely happened and what the next steps were. They called while I lay in a hospital bed on the second floor of Good Samaritan, alone except for the nurses checking in every few hours, while outside my window the sky went from afternoon gray to evening dark to morning pale and back again. 31 times, 2 days, and not once. Anaya arrived on the afternoon of the second day. I should tell you about Anaya, because she is the reason this story has any light in it at all. 15 years ago, Anaya was in my 8th grade English class. She was 13, quiet in the way that's really a disguise for something bigger underneath. She sat in the 3rd row and turned in her assignments on time, but her writing was flat, mechanical, like she was performing the motions without inhabiting them. Other teachers mentioned her in the lounge, another one of those kids who doesn't try. I watched her for 6 weeks before I understood what I was actually seeing. One November afternoon, I kept her after class to go over an essay. The feedback I had written was gentle, asking her to dig deeper, to tell me what the story actually meant to her. She read my comments and her chin started to shake, and she looked up at me with eyes that were way too tired for a 13-year-old, and she said, "I don't know how to talk about what things mean to me." That was the beginning. I'll spare you the details because they're hers to keep, but what I'll say is that Anaya's home life was difficult in ways that took tremendous courage to survive. I started meeting with her twice a week after school. Nothing formal, just talking, just making sure she had somewhere that felt safe. I called her mother once, which didn't go well, and I called the school counselor, which went better. I brought extra food. I stayed late. I did what teachers do when they decide a kid is worth fighting for. By the end of 8th grade, Anaya was writing essays that made the other teachers ask me what I'd done differently. By high school, she was in honors English. At graduation, she found me in the crowd and hugged me so hard I lost my breath and said, "You made me believe I had something worth saying." We stayed in touch. She went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship, studied social work, got her master's degree, and now runs a youth advocacy nonprofit on the east side of Cincinnati. We had lunch every few months. She came to Gerald's funeral and sat with me through the whole service, and came back the next day with groceries and made me eat. When she couldn't reach me on Wednesday evening and got no answer Thursday morning, she called the hospitals. She found me at Good Samaritan on Thursday afternoon. She walked into my room, still in her work clothes, and I woke up from a doze to find her sitting in the chair beside my bed, looking at me like she was counting my breaths to make sure they kept coming. She squeezed my hand when she saw my eyes open. "You're okay," she said. "I'm here. You're going to be okay." I looked at the chair on the other side of the bed, the one that was empty, and I didn't have to say anything because Anaya already knew. "The hospital called your son," she said carefully. "Many times." "I know," said the nurse. She had come in while I slept. She stood at the door with the same careful, professional gentleness I had come to recognize as the face nurses wear when the information they carry might cause pain. "We've been trying to reach him since you were admitted Wednesday afternoon. We haven't been able to make contact." Then Anaya held out her phone. Her face was the same one she used to wear as a 13-year-old when she had something hard to give me, something she knew I didn't want but needed. I saw his post, the team photo, the forest behind him. No calls, just presence. It was time-stamped Thursday morning, 18 hours after I'd been admitted. Beneath it, a second post from Wednesday night. A group dinner at what looked like a lodge. Long wooden tables, plates piled high, everyone laughing. His caption said, "These people fed my soul today. Grateful doesn't cover it." I looked at my son's face in those photos for a long time. He looked happy. He looked rested. He looked like a man who had, genuinely, put everything else down for a few days to be present with people he valued. I just wasn't one of them. "Scroll down," I heard myself say. There were more. A sunrise run. A whiteboard covered in colored markers, the retreat's goals and vision and core values. Cooper in the background of one shot, sitting on a cabin porch with a tablet, which meant Brenda and Cooper had come along too. The whole family had come. They had cell service. Brenda posted a sunset photo with a heart emoji. They had Wi-Fi. They had everything, and the hospital had called 31 times. I handed the phone back to Anaya and closed my eyes. My head was quiet in the way it gets when something too large to process simply goes still inside you, the way a room goes quiet after something falls and breaks. 2 days later, the neurologist cleared me to go home. The thanks in advance had left no permanent damage. I would need medication adjustments, a follow-up MRI in 6 weeks, and someone to drive me home because hospital policy wouldn't allow me to leave alone. Anaya drove me. She helped me inside, made sure my prescriptions were filled, stayed until evening. It was only when she went to check my mailbox before leaving that everything shifted. She came back inside with a large envelope, the kind used for formal correspondence, with a law firm's name in the upper left corner that I didn't recognize. Not Miss Patricia Webb's firm. My family lawyer. Someone else's. She set it on the kitchen table and looked at me. "Do you want me to stay while you open it?" I opened it. Inside was a document with a lot of official language about power of attorney, about a petition to designate a primary decision-maker for medical and financial affairs on behalf of an individual determined to be at elevated risk of cognitive and physical decline. My name was in the blank at the top. The firm's name at the bottom was Hargrove and Associates. Nathan used Hargrove for his business contracts. Attached was a form. Sections filled out in Nathan's handwriting, which I would know anywhere, from 30 years of birthday cards and Christmas tags, from the grocery lists he used to leave on my counter when he still came to visit. Primary concerns cited: memory lapses reported by multiple contacts, inability to manage household safely, increased fall risk, deteriorating judgment, memory lapses reported by multiple contacts, increased fall risk. I had never fallen before Wednesday. I had never been diagnosed with any cognitive issue. My doctor had, at my last physical 6 months ago, called my test results unremarkable, which she meant as a compliment. Multiple contacts. I sat with that phrase for a long time. 3 days after I came home, my neighbor Helen stopped by with a casserole. Helen is 70, a retired pharmacist, sharp as anyone I've ever known, and she's been my closest friend in this neighborhood for 16 years. She came in and set the casserole on the counter and then stood there in the way people stand when they have something to say that they've been rehearsing. "Nathan called me," she said finally, "about a month ago." I looked at her. "He said he was worried about you. He asked whether I'd noticed anything concerning, whether you seemed forgetful or confused, whether you were managing the house okay." She paused. "I told him you were the most competent person on this street and had been for as long as I'd known you. I told him you helped me figure out my insurance paperwork last spring and you remembered details about my coverage that I'd forgotten." "What did he say?" "He said he appreciated the feedback but that the family had some concerns based on other reports. He said they were looking into options to make sure you were taken care of." Taken care of. Documented by their own lawyer before I'd had so much as a stumble. Calling my neighbors to build a record, and now a power of attorney petition sitting on my kitchen table. I thought about the house. Gerald and I bought it in 1989. It's a 3-bedroom Cape Cod on a corner lot with a backyard garden I've kept going for 35 years. The mortgage was paid off in 2011. After Gerald died, I had it appraised out of practicality. The neighborhood had changed. The value had gone up considerably. I thought about Gerald's life insurance policy and his pension, which had transferred to me, and the money we'd saved over decades of careful living. And I thought about Nathan, who had a large mortgage on a house that was slightly too big and a lifestyle that required 2 incomes to maintain. Who had, 3 years ago, casually mentioned over dinner that they were thinking of downsizing and maybe I should think about what made sense for my situation too. Who had, last year, sent me a brochure for a senior community on the north side, glossy and cheerful, with photos of smiling elderly people doing water aerobics, entirely unprompted. I hadn't connected those things before. Now I did. The house, the savings, the pension. If he had power of attorney, if he could manage my affairs, sell the property on my behalf, make financial decisions in my name, the money would be accessible in ways it currently wasn't. And if I were in a managed care facility somewhere, the house would be empty, market-ready. I picked up the phone and called Miss Patricia Webb. Patricia has been our family lawyer for 22 years. She knew Gerald, she knew Nathan as a child. When I explained what I had found, she was quiet for a long time, and the quality of her silence told me she wasn't surprised, which was its own kind of devastation. "I've seen this before," she said. "Not often, but enough. Adult children with financial stress and access to a parent's estate. Sometimes it starts with genuine concern and goes sideways. Sometimes it doesn't start with genuine concern at all. Is the petition valid?" "It's filed," she said. "It hasn't been granted. You have standing to contest it, and given that there's no medical basis for it and you've just passed a full neurological workup, it won't hold up. But Margaret, we need to move quickly. And you may want to think about whether it's time to revise your estate planning." "I want to revise everything," I said. "All of it. I need you to be absolutely certain. Once it's done." "I'm certain," I told her. "I have never been more certain of anything since I decided to marry Gerald." She asked me to come in on Friday. I went. We spent 2 hours going over everything. What I wanted, what I didn't, what felt right, and what felt like it would let me sleep at night. By the time I left, a new will was in progress. A trust for Cooper protected from parental access, a substantial donation to the youth advocacy nonprofit where Anaya worked, named for Gerald, charitable gifts to the Library Foundation and to my church. A smaller bequest to Anaya directly, because she had earned something the law couldn't name. Nathan would receive nothing. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. I gave Patricia 1 week to finalize everything. During that week, Nathan called. He'd gotten home from the retreat on Sunday. The hospital had left messages. He'd listened to them, apparently, eventually, and called on Sunday evening with his voice pitched at the register he uses in professional situations when he needs to manage a narrative. "Mom, God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." I let him talk. He explained the retreat center's strict no phones policy, a policy that apparently allowed Brenda to post sunset photos but not to receive emergency medical calls, and I let him explain it without interrupting because I wanted to hear how the story sounded when he told it. "I should have called ahead," he said. "Left an alternate contact. It was irresponsible, and I'm sorry. Are you okay? What did the doctors say? Do you need anything?" I said I was fine, that I was recovering well, that the neurologist was satisfied. "We should talk," he said, "about the long term, about making sure you're set up safely. I've been thinking a lot lately about your situation." "My situation." "I'm sure you have," I said. A pause. "Mom? Let's meet in person," I said. "I'm having a meeting with Patricia Webb on Thursday. You should be there. We need to discuss some estate updates, and it's better to do these things in person." The change in his voice was immediate. The professional register dropped and something more attentive replaced it. "Of course. Yes. What time?" 2 o'clock, I said. "And Nathan?" "Bring Brenda." Thursday morning I dressed carefully. Gerald had given me a dark green cardigan for our last Christmas together, soft cashmere, and I wore it with gray slacks and the pearl earrings his mother had left me. Anaya drove me. In the car I was quiet and she didn't try to fill the silence, which is one of the things I have always loved about her. She has always known when silence is what I needed. Patricia's conference room smelled of coffee and paper. Dark wood paneling, tall bookshelves, a table that meant business. Anaya and I arrived at 1:45. Patricia greeted us, reviewed the final documents with me one last time, confirmed everything was in order. At 2 o'clock exactly, Nathan and Brenda came in. Nathan was in a sport coat and open-collar shirt, the way he dresses when he wants to appear approachable but still in charge. Brenda wore a blazer and had her hair done. They were carrying coffee cups from the place down the street, which told me they'd arrived early and waited outside, preparing. They stopped when they saw Anaya. "Why is she here?" Nathan's voice went flat. Patricia answered before I could. "Miss Johnson is here at Mrs. Holloway's request. Please sit down." Brenda glanced at Nathan. Something moved between them. They sat. 20 minutes of surface conversation followed. Nathan asked about my health with the right questions in the right order, and I answered them briefly, and then I said, "Before we get to the estate, there are some things I want to say." He leaned back slightly. The professional distance came back. "Of course. Take your time." "I know about the power of attorney petition," I said. Brenda's hand moved to Nathan's arm. He didn't blink. "Mom, that was only about making sure you had the right support structure. You filed it with your own business lawyer before I'd had any medical incident at all. We'd been concerned for a while. Concerned enough to call Helen and ask if I seemed confused." I watched his jaw tighten. Concerned enough to document conversations with my neighbors and call it multiple contacts reporting memory lapses. Concerned enough to file with Hargrove and Associates before ever saying a word to me about it. The room was very quiet. I reached into my bag and set the power of attorney documents on the table. Patricia had printed everything. Nathan looked at the pages like he was deciding whether to pick them up. Brenda spoke first. "Margaret, you have to understand." Nathan was worried. "We both were. You're living alone, and after what happened to Gerald, we didn't want you to be in a vulnerable position." I looked at her steadily. "And yet when the hospital called 31 times over 2 days, you didn't come." "We didn't know it was serious," Nathan said. "We didn't have service." "You had service to post online. You had service for Brenda to put up photos. You had service for every other thing except the 31 calls from the hospital where your mother was alone for 2 days after a stroke." He said nothing. I set the phone on the table, the screenshots Anaya had taken, the group photo, the dinner, the sunrise run, the timestamps. "No calls. Just presence," I said. "You wrote that yourself." Brenda looked at her coffee cup. Nathan looked at the table. I kept going because I had waited long enough to say all of it. "Cooper's birthday this year. You were in Nashville. You didn't invite me, and I found out from a photo. Last Christmas, Brenda's parents in Scottsdale. You were home on the 22nd because your car was in the garage, but you didn't answer the door. I stood on your porch with Cooper's gifts for 15 minutes. Mom," Nathan started. I held up my hand. "I'm not finished." Anaya sat very still beside me. Patricia watched with her hands folded on her file folders. "I have spent 4 years since your father died trying to earn a place in your life, calling and apologizing for calling too much, making myself smaller so I'd take up less of your time, telling myself you were busy, that this was just what modern families looked like, that you'd come around. I convinced myself that being a good mother meant accepting whatever you had room to give me, even when what you had room to give me was almost nothing." Nathan's expression was doing something complicated, cycling through defensiveness and something that might have been, underneath it all, shame. "Your father died in this city with me beside him," I said. "You came for the funeral, and you were appropriate and composed, and people told me how strong you were. You left after 4 days. I handled the estate, the bank accounts, the insurance, the storage unit full of his tools, the 38 years of a life we built together. I handled all of it alone. And then I spent 4 more years trying to act like that was fine." Brenda's eyes were wet. "I don't know if it was genuine. I didn't have the energy to decide." "You didn't want to visit," I said. "You didn't want to include me. What you wanted was the house, the savings, the pension. And when you decided I was getting older and the window might be closing, you started making calls to my neighbors and filing legal documents with your business lawyer." I slid the power of attorney petition to the center of the table. "I had a full neurological evaluation last week. Patricia has the documentation. There is no basis for this petition. My mind is clear, my judgment is sound, and my affairs are in order. If you try to pursue this, you will spend a significant amount of money, and you will lose." Brenda started to say something. I turned to Patricia. Patricia opened the leather folder. "We are here today," she said, her voice precise and professional, "to review the revised last will and testament of Margaret Elaine Holloway." Nathan sat up straighter. Brenda smoothed her blazer. Patricia read through the formal language, the revisions, the effective date, and then she reached the section on distribution. "To my grandson Cooper," she read, a trust fund of $90,000 designated exclusively for educational expenses, to be managed by Patricia Webb as independent trustee, with no parental access or oversight until the beneficiary reaches the age of 18. Brenda's hand found Nathan's arm again. To the Gerald Holloway Youth Advocacy Fund, in partnership with the Cincinnati Youth Voices nonprofit, a gift of $75,000 to be used for scholarships and program services for at-risk adolescents. Nathan's face had gone still. To Grace Memorial Library Foundation, a gift of $30,000. To Riverside Community Church, a gift of $25,000. To Anaya Johnson, in recognition of her extraordinary generosity of spirit and her irreplaceable presence in the life of this family, a gift of $40,000. Anaya made a sound beside me and shook her head quickly. I took her hand. Mrs. Holloway retains $80,000 for personal use and end-of-life expenses. Patricia looked up. The remainder of the estate, including the property at 1417 Elmwood Drive, is to be sold and the proceeds distributed equally among the charitable organizations named above. Nathan stood up. His chair scraped the floor the way Claudia's had in the story that had stayed with me, the story that had made me feel, when I first heard it, like someone had described something I already knew. "You can't do this," he said. His voice had lost its professional finish. "You're punishing us for one mistake." Patricia spoke before I could. Mrs. Holloway underwent a comprehensive psychological and cognitive evaluation last Tuesday. She passed every measure of competency and sound judgment. This will is properly executed and witnessed. Any legal challenge will be expensive and unsuccessful. "One mistake," I said. "Let me tell you about one mistake. One mistake is missing a phone call. 31 calls in 2 days while I lay in the hospital is not a mistake. That is a choice. And it was not the first choice of that kind you have made." I told him everything I had said to myself in the night since I'd come home, all the things I had been too careful or too afraid to say out loud, the pattern of years, the shrinking visits, the unanswered calls, the door I stood outside on December 22nd, the birthday party in Nashville I found out about from a photo. Cooper's life I had watched from a distance. Brenda was crying. Nathan's face was hard. "You're going to regret this," he said. "When you're old and sick and alone and you need someone, you'll wish you'd thought this through." I've been alone, Nathan. I've been alone since your father died, and in some ways for years before that. The only difference is that now I'm choosing it honestly instead of pretending it isn't true. He walked to the door. Brenda followed, her heels sharp on the floor. He turned back once and opened his mouth and then closed it and left. The door shut behind them. Patricia gathered her papers. Anaya was holding my hand very tightly. The clock on the wall was ticking. That was 8 weeks ago. Since then, Nathan has called 6 times. The calls followed a pattern I recognized from every difficult conversation I'd had in 31 years of teaching. First the bargaining. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can we talk in person?" Then the anger. "This is vindictive and you know it." Then the guilt. "Cooper is asking for you. You're hurting him by doing this." Then the negotiation. "What if we went to family therapy? What if we started fresh?" I answered twice. I kept my responses brief. I said what was true. That I wished him well. That I was not willing to continue a relationship built on one-sided accommodation. That Cooper's trust was there for his education and would be there when he was ready for it. I have not heard from Brenda. I have heard from Cooper, once, through Anaya, who has a relationship with his school through her nonprofit work and has found careful, appropriate ways to maintain a connection. He sent me a card that his teacher helped him make, a drawing of a house with a garden, the flowers larger than the windows, the way children draw them, and his name signed at the bottom in careful block letters with a heart at the end. I have it on my refrigerator next to a photo of Gerald in the garden the summer before he got sick, squinting into the sun with his gardening gloves on, laughing at something I don't remember saying. My life, in these 8 weeks, has opened up in ways I didn't know it could at 67. I've started volunteering at Anaya's nonprofit on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, working with teenagers who remind me of every student I ever fought for, kids who need someone to tell them their voice is worth something. I am not an easy teacher. I never was. They seem to like that. Helen and I have dinner every Wednesday. Patricia comes to book club on the first Thursday of the month. The neurologist cleared me at my 6-week follow-up and said my brain was, in her words, doing just fine. I've started taking walks in the evening, long ones, the kind Gerald and I used to take when we were first married and didn't have anywhere to be. The neighborhood is quiet at 7 o'clock. The light comes through the maples at the angle I've always loved. I still live in the house. For now. I'm going to sell it in the spring, not because Nathan wanted me to, but because I want to. Something smaller. Something that doesn't take the whole weekend to clean. Something that feels like a new sentence beginning rather than the end of an old one. I have a trip planned for March. Savannah, Georgia. Gerald always said we'd go when we retired, and then retirement became grief, and grief became years, and now it's going to become Savannah, just me, with a guidebook and comfortable shoes, and no itinerary past breakfast. People ask me sometimes if I'm sad about Nathan, and the honest answer is yes. Yes, in the way I've been sad about a great number of things in the past 4 years, a sadness that is real and present and doesn't require me to deny it. I grieve the son I raised and the belief I held for too long that love, if you offered it consistently enough, always found its way back to you. It doesn't. Some people take what's offered and keep moving, and eventually the honest thing is to stop offering it. But I want to say something to you. If you're watching this late at night, if this story found you in a moment that feels familiar, if you have stood outside a door or waited by a phone or told yourself one more time that the people who are supposed to show up simply need more time, stop counting the calls. The number, however high it gets, is not the point. The point is what you do with the clarity that number gives you. I'm 67 years old. I had a stroke in a grocery store and my son didn't come. A young woman I taught 30 years ago slept in the chair beside my hospital bed for 2 days and drove me home and made sure I took my medicine. A neighbor brought a casserole. A lawyer of 22 years helped me protect my own life from the person who should have been protecting it. Family is not the people who share your blood. Family is the people who answer. They called Nathan 31 times. He didn't answer. And when I finally stopped trying to make that my problem to solve, when I stopped making myself smaller to fit inside the version of his life that had no room for me, something happened that I did not expect. I found out who I was when I wasn't doing it, and it turns out she's someone I very much want to know. If this story spoke to something you've been carrying, leave me a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story, if you want to, or just tell me you're here. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it's not too late to choose themselves, please share this video with them tonight. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for being here with me. I'll see you in the next one.